Retro gaming, as it's called nowadays, isn't just a place for a nostalgia-soaked haze of memories and a small subsection of users who pine for a time that they never got to experience. Its increasing prominence is a response to dissatisfaction of the player base with modern titles. For newer players, it probably feels like there's a set curriculum of games, just like a required reading section in order to have them be perceived as a true gamer. This stems from a place of insecurity, as for decades our collective hobby was derided and belittled, and now it's one of the biggest and most popular forms of entertainment in the world. Whether you refuse to touch anything past the early 2000s, or whether all you do is play mobile games on work breaks, you're all gamers in the eyes of the industry. That's very much a double-edged sword, and there have been some great improvements and some terrible consequences as a result of this rapid expansion. But I've already talked about that in a previous video, so instead I'm going to yammer on about things that annoy me while playing them. Launchers. Remember that old exhibit meme? Hey brah, I heard you like launchers, so I put a launcher in your launcher so you can launch a launcher with your launcher. There's an increasing trend from the games industry to have a launcher pop up when you want to play a game instead of the game itself. This launcher will advertise other products and events at you, and it's a glorified MMO launcher for a single player game. Great, let's play the game. Unskippable videos. Here's Doom 64. Let's load this up now. Okay, a logo, and another logo, and a third logo, and the intro video, and yeah, you get the idea. So after clicking through a launcher and several logos, we're finally at the game, right? Oh no, that's not the case. Everyone is connected to the internet at all times these days. So you have to get online and provide additional details to the company with a user login, and yes, hello, this is a single player game, not a monthly subscription service. You shouldn't attempt to harvest my data in order to play your game. Content patches that make the game worse. One of the great benefits of being connected and having launchers is that patches can be delivered to improve the game, except when they don't. Whether it's changing the licensing agreement so you can share your data with other companies, introducing new game mechanics that ruin the balance of an old title, or simply mucking around with the AI so that the game becomes unplayable, the obligation to provide post-launch support often has developers reinventing the wheel out of malice or stupidity, or political and corporate meddling. Many a game studio has been bought out by a larger company. Just look at EA's acquisitions over the years. It's nothing new, but at least you could clutch the original CDs of your former favourites' greatest hits and play them undisturbed. Nowadays you have no such privacy, and there's money to be made. You know, assuming they don't just take the game down permanently due to some licensing issues. New content developers will be hired to craft DLC that isn't as good as the original game or adds little or nothing of value, oftentimes making the original title worse or outright unstable, much like the forced updates I'd previously been talking about. Or you'll find that something you could previously do in your game has been walled off, and is only available to users of a particular DLC now, like being German and wanting a particularly violent game, or wanting a Red Cross logo on your health packs and satanic imagery in your original Doom game. Nope. Sorry, your game's been gimped and now it's being milked, and so are you by extension. Happy playing with your games as a service, content packs, seasons, skins, additional maps, all this new stuff, and often it's added for free. Okay, most of the time you have to pay for it, but occasionally it's free. Isn't that fantastic? You never have to stop playing this game again. Except that there's only so many times you can do the same thing over and over and over and over and over. Variety is called the spice of life for a reason. The MMO attitude as it applies to the single player game doesn't result in a heavenly bounty of additional content that rivals the original or surpasses it in scope. No, that's a rarity. Instead, what we get is a game treated as a base for additional future pieces of content. There are no complete works, and developers have used the ever-increasing prevalence of the ever-present internet connection as an excuse to release half-baked early access titles that they'll promise to fix later and often never do. You're playtesting a glorified beta for them and paying for the privilege of doing so, and placing trust and money in that developer in the hopes that they won't just take your money and run, and if that game is tied to a central server, well, it's already on life support. There's only so many years before, poof, the server's gone. And unless the community can finagle something together, then that's it. No more game. But that's okay, because you'll have got your money's worth due to game padding. If you're beholden to the demands that your game should have X amount of post-game content patched in by Y date, then you're gonna have to pad things out. You might not even do that post-launch, it might be built into the game already, in the form of procedural generation, radiant questing, collectathons, or pointless quests and additional goals that don't add anything but additional minutes of in-game time, so that they can claim they've got a big single-player campaign in store for you, when really it's just single-player as an afterthought. In fact, we've gone so far into the gradual morphing of single-player into a multiplayer experience that the single-player itself has reached a point in many titles where it's just a tutorial for the multiplayer that lasts a few hours. A few elaborate set pieces for the trailer, some hired hands providing competent voice acting, and a story-by-numbers plot to drive things forward for a few hours at most. And it's a perfect showcase of the consolification of modern gaming. Press and hold to pick up. Follow the giant prompt to not die, quick-time events, limited save slots, and much more. Since the early 2000s, many developers switched their primary focus to developing for the burgeoning console market, and then porting back to the PC. There was a gradual standardization of controls and gameplay elements that stifled both creativity and player expectation. And just like the games themselves, these elements were ported back over to the PC. Unskippable animations and cutscenes, level scaling, forced game mechanic sections, excessive cooldown timers, an overwhelming number of map markers clogging up the screen. Great stuff. The worst of all these, though, was the removal of player agency. The constant desire of big titles to appear artistically valid and to be more like the cinema. They're telling a story and you're just there to press the right buttons at the right time. Between the quick-time events and the player losing control altogether, while an elaborate and lengthy cutscene that we've talked about before is played out, or simply levels where things should work in order to advance them, but don't. The player isn't technically a player, and this isn't really a game. It's a multimedia experience that leads the gamer along by the nose. It's like the game designers have become Temple Grandin and we're just the cattle, peacefully marching along in distraction until we reach the required destination. And the worst thing about all of this is the exceptions do not rule. There are plenty of games out there that are nothing like this, and the homogenized masses have been programmed on a societal level over the last 15 to 20 years to associate a series of Pavlovian reactions to constitute the whole gaming experience. It's why people keep going back to the old games, despite every single other thing being inferior to the modern equivalents. Come join me and find out just how good gaming used to be.